The reading today is from a section of a long letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the Christians in Corinth. Back then, when the church was new, they did not have buildings like this. They worshiped in secret places because their religion was illegal in the Roman Empire. They would go over to each other's houses to share a meal, take communion, and learn Christian teachings. A group connected with the Christian leader Chloe reaches out to Paul. Paul helped the church in Corinth start. He did some teaching and preaching there, identified leaders, and set up pastors, elders, and deacons to lead the church after he left Corinth. One of the people in leadership was Chloe, and another person was Apollos. Chloe isn't mentioned in this section, but she is important because she reports the division to Paul in order for it to stop. If you'd like to learn more about Chloe and her role in Corinth, look up the research of Margaret Moscow. Chloe and the others have been trying to keep the church from division, but she reaches out to Paul for help. The church members are fighting with each other and struggling to get along. The main source of their fight is about whose followers they are. Some of them prefer Paul because he was part of their faith formation at the beginning of the church and they miss him. They do not want to receive the teachings from Apollos. They say things like, "We belong to Paul." Another group in the Corinthian church feels the same way about Apollos, and even though Paul stayed with them, set up their leadership, and brought Apollos on board, this doesn't seem to make a difference for the people in Corinth. They say things like, "We belong to Apollos." Chloe and the leaders tried to keep the division from spreading, but it isn't working. She decides to reach out to Paul, asking for wisdom and direction. And when Paul receives this communication from Chloe and the Corinthian leadership, he responds quickly and decisively. He tells them that they are all the same. They are all part of the same community. Paul and Apollos are simply people doing the same job, but at different stages of the church's life. Picking favorites and fighting does not help anyone. In fact, being on Team Paul or Team Apollos further cements Paul's point in the letter. He tells them they are behaving like infants and they are not ready to receive spiritual solid food based on how they are treating one another and their pastors, deacons, and elders. Paul does not pull any punches in this letter to the church in Corinth. He tells them exactly how it is. Being a Christian community is not about having favorites. It is not about dividing up into warring groups. It is not about fighting with each other over who is the best. So what exactly does being a Christian community look like?
With the Super Bowl theme this Sunday, I thought it would be fitting for me to talk about the Baltimore City Public Schools Super Bowl, the Poly versus City game. As a senior at Poly, I will reluctantly admit City has had our number for a while now, and this year City was going for their 10th win in a row. However, Poly had an incredible season and was expected to take the win. That being said, there was a lot on the line and the tensions ran high. After a controversial up-and-down game, City took the win and stormed across the field, taunting the Poly sideline. In retaliation, some of Poly's coaches, fans, and a few players rushed towards the City sideline, meeting in the middle of the field. What started as simple taunting elevated to fights when two coaches from either side started to get physical. After that, fights broke out throughout the stands. It was an embarrassment for our schools and our city. In the end, everyone was all right and nobody was injured, but both high schools lost their chance to compete at the state level. The actions of the coaches and the fans hurt the students that were actually playing the game. As I watched everything from my spot at the top of the stands, one thing stood out to me. The players were some of the only people not fighting. Some players stood to the side shaking hands, some players watched shaking their heads at the actions of their fans and coaches, and some even ran to the middle to separate the coaches before the fights got worse. Despite these being some of the youngest people there, they set a better example than the grown-ups fighting in the middle. The players were leaders, just like Paul and Apollos. The issue in this game, and in many other cases, is that everybody lost sight of why the game even took place. The competition overshadowed the fun that lives at the heart of these games. The fans and coaches forgot that in the end, we all represent Baltimore City Public Schools, and we all represent a city that frequently gets a bad rep. Similarly, in Paul's congregation, the members forgot why they were at the church in the first place. They forgot that they were all on God's team and that the church's leadership was not some mindless competition. In reality, it didn't really matter if Paul or Apollos was their leader. Luckily, everyone has their leaders to reintegrate themselves and remind themselves why they do what they do. At the football game, there is hope in the fact that the young men playing the game were leaders and set a good example. In Paul's letter, the congregation is lucky to have Paul and Apollos as leaders that can check them and make sure they don't forget the true reasons for what they do. The congregation is lucky to have Paul and Apollos to keep them in check. Our schools are lucky to have such good student leaders that are here to set a good example even when the coaches don't. So as you go out and enjoy this year's Super Bowl, remember that no matter what side you take, you are still on the same side as God, your friends, your family, and bystanders. Thank you.
Throughout our lives, we find ourselves a part of many groups. These groups, however, they're not all teams. My fellow youth members and our leaders, we're a team. Our choir is a team, and our pastors too. Collaboration, respect, and compassion. These are all key concepts that keep our teams afloat. These three concepts have been important in every team I've found myself a part of, but I learned about them first in this very building. Outside of my family, Brown was my first team. I've been attending Brown since I was an infant. My parents first visited over 25 years ago, and they knew from the beginning that this community was special. I can recall a conversation I had with my dad several years ago, where he told me that the moment he knew Brown was different from any other church he had seen was when Reverend Dr. Roger Gensch shared that everyone is welcome at God's table for communion, regardless of circumstance. This sentiment has made him and the countless others in the years since feel welcome to the team. My two siblings and I grew up in this community, and the church grew with us. I've seen this youth group grow and shrink, but a team with few people, it's still strong. Brown has shown me the value of authentic self-expression and the impact of a welcoming space for all. One of my many fond memories growing up in the church was dressing up to tell a story during children's time. I was playing Joseph, and I took my role pretty seriously. When the story got to my line, I exclaimed, "I am the great Joseph!" And that resulted in a lot of laughter from the pews. I've never felt like I had to be anything other than myself on this team, and just as importantly, Brown has taught me how to lead a team of my own. I've been a musician for 7 years, but it did not become an integral part of my identity until I got to high school. My mom and sister had both been in marching bands, so following in their footsteps seemed like the obvious choice. What I did not know was that this team would be both the hardest to be a part of and the hardest to leave. I was introduced to the fiercest friends one could dream of, as well as the challenges of taking on 2 leadership positions in my junior year. I learned how to be a better musician, friend, and human. And during my time in student leadership, I was able to teach my peers how to become the next generation of leaders and how to nurture a culture of camaraderie. I know 14-year-old me would be proud of who I have become because I am now the person I needed when I was that age. Despite life's tribulations, we're all still here. Whether you play a sport, an instrument, or simply have a favorite pastime that you share with others, you deserve to be part of a team no matter the form. What we value here at Brown can be applied anywhere, but you must remember the 3 key concepts of collaboration, respect, and compassion. These can transform any group of people into a team of friends.
I'm about 5 inches shorter than Sarah, so thanks for the transition space so I could be a little taller for y'all. Another mark of Christian community that Paul points out is spiritual maturity or wisdom. He does not tell them that it happens overnight. In fact, he points out that spiritual maturity takes time. He tells them they behaved younger when they were newer Christians, and now is the time for them to grow up spiritually. He tells them that their jealousy and quarreling are signs they have not matured yet. And Paul encourages them to grow into their faith more by treating one another with respect for leaders and promoting belonging for all members of the Christian church in Corinth. Although he does use the metaphor of infancy and milk to describe their lack of maturity, he says nothing about the chronological age of the leadership that he has put in place. He does not say that your age is a mark of maturity. It is conduct that is a mark of spiritual maturity. We actually have no idea how old Apollos is. We have no idea how old Chloe is, where the house church in Corinth may have been hosted. We know that they were appointed leaders by Paul, and Paul saw their gifts. Age does not matter when it comes to spiritual maturity, Paul seems to say, when it comes to who the leaders will be of the church in the present. He makes the case for trust and harmony using the metaphor of gardening later. He calls himself the planter, and then Apollos is the waterer, but God is the one who really does the work. God is the grower of the garden, not Paul, not Apollos, not anyone else. No one except God gets the credit. Because that garden, their church, could not exist on its own without God. Seeds like evangelizing or watering like teaching and preaching are not enough. The mystery of growth, the mystery of God's power, is what makes the garden and the church what it is. Paul reminds us that we need each other. We cannot make it on our own. We cannot take all of the credit when everyone contributes to make the garden what it is, to make our garden, our church, what it is. Our church community is full of all types of people with different skills and gifts. We would not be the beautiful, diverse place we are without all of you here to make it that way. We must remember that we are all on the same team, God's team. And with a little respect, collaboration, and compassion, we can go a long way together. Like Allison and Alex and Sarah have all shared this morning, we grow together when we go together, not when we split apart. May we all take a page from Paul's playbook and learn how to do the same.